Have we got a Hall of Famer adventure for you today? We are heading up to Alaska. We're going to be going to the Kenai, Fjords, and Denali National Park. It's a multi-activity adventure where we'll be hiking, we'll be paddling, and we'll even be going on a safari in Denali that was one of the highlights of our guest Millie's today's adventure. I cannot wait to share it with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I'm super stoked today to tell you about the Denali and Kenai Fjords adventure that Millie did with Austin Adventures, which merged with my affiliate Active Adventures. It's an absolutely amazing vacation. And as one of my affiliates, you're entitled to an exclusive Active Travel Adventures discount that is good even if you've got a sale going on, but you need to email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com to get the current code. And this works for any Active Adventures, any Austin Adventures, and they also brought into the family Discovery Bicycle Tour, so that's another great company you can check out. Again, email me to get the current promo code. With that, let's get on with my interview with Millie. I've asked Millie to come on the program to talk to us about her trip to Kenai and Denali National Parks in Alaska. Welcome to the program, Millie. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So one question I'd like to ask to start with is, this trip was rated like a 3 out of 5 for adventure-wise. You do a lot of different things. Had you done adventure travels before? Was this your first one? Or could you tell us about your journey getting into this kind of a vacation?
Sure. I absolutely love adventure travel, and no, this was not my first adventure type trip. In fact, back in 2016, I took a trip to the South Island of New Zealand with Austin Adventures' sister company called Active Adventures. And that was probably my first very immersive adventure type travel. So I had a very good feeling with this company. So when I decided that it was time for me to go to Alaska, I ended up going with Austin Adventures. But I've been doing this sort of thing for years. In fact, a few years ago, I did a tour of the Galapagos with a group of friends that involved a lot of hiking. I've been to India and done a safari. I've hiked Machu Picchu. I just love getting out and being with the nature, as I like to say it. So yeah, this was just one more trip.
Cool. Yeah, so that'll be inspiration for us. So my backstory is I just got into this like a decade ago. So I'm totally sold on it, and everybody I've introduced it to it, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could travel like this. So no, that's great. Why Alaska? What made this one pop to the top of the list saying, I'm doing that one?
Well, of course, it's Alaska, and everybody has got to go there at least once. I knew that I did not want to do a cruise, that I wanted to spend a lot of time on land. Also, my husband was stationed there in the Army in the early 2000s and just couldn't say enough good things about it. I did go to Anchorage in 2010 to run the Mayor's Marathon. And so I had just a taste of what Alaska was like when we were there for that long weekend to do that race. So I knew I had to come back.
So did you do this on your own? Did your husband come? Did you go with friends, or how did that work?
I was a solo traveler. To be honest, my husband is not a huge fan of adventure travel. He prefers to center his vacations around a marathon, whereas I'm the exact opposite. I love to get out into nature and challenge myself. So with his absolute blessing, I did this trip on my own as a solo traveler.
Now, had you traveled solo before, or was this a first for you as well?
Oh, absolutely. I've done solo travel many, many times. And I mitigate the risks by going with an organized travel group. I'm not quite brave enough to go out there and just figure it all out myself, but I do enjoy traveling with a group of like-minded individuals, kind of like the group that I traveled with to Alaska.
Yeah, and Alaska too. I find myself, Millie, that when I'm going, particularly in the backcountry, like you do on this trip, I don't want to do that by myself if something goes wrong, or just the logistics, because there are no highway. I mean, they've got to figure all that stuff out for you. So totally on board with that. And you can go solo on these groups. It's a great way to travel and feel like you're solo but together.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm all about safety. I'm old enough, I'm 61, that I really have a good appreciation for the challenges out there that could make something unsafe. And so I prefer, especially a trip like Alaska, where you are in the backcountry and you could have an encounter with large wildlife, having guides that know how to react in that situation. And so I felt very safe.
So we're going to drill down a little bit deeper as we go on, but how about just giving us a brief overview of what this trip involved?
So we were out for about a week. It started out with linking up with the group in Anchorage. So I flew into Anchorage the day before from Hawaii, where I live, which is actually a very easy 5.5 hour overnight flight. And we started by heading to Seward, Alaska, where we got on a nice size, I'm not going to call it a cruise ship, it was more like a day cruise ship, for a 6 hour tour of Resurrection Bay and the Kenai Fjords. Yeah, so it started out with that day cruise. And then the next day, we headed out for some hiking. Later on, we did some river rafting where we got to float down the river and do a little bit of I won't call it whitewater rafting, but there were some waves. There was a big hike where we hiked up to an ice field to the Harding Glacier. We did some kayaking, which was great. I love that. We took a bus tour into Denali National Park, more hiking. So it was this nice combination of being on the water as well as out in the woods hiking around.
Cool. And one thing I like about Active and Austin is it tends to be hiking focus, but you tend to have multi-activities like the kayaking and the rafting and the sometimes biking and such, which makes it fun.
Absolutely. I like mixing it up. I think doing back-to-back hiking, especially when it's steep, can just be exhausting. And so Austin did an excellent job of hard hike one day, followed by a mellow day the next day, doing some kayaking, followed by another hard hike, and then back to maybe the bus tour of Denali National Park. So I never felt overwhelmed.
And one thing too is with Austin, sometimes they have family oriented trips, sometimes they have adult only. I assume you went on the adult only trip.
Yes, this was an adult only trip.
Okay, so if you're thinking about doing this, you want to make sure you sign up for the one that's appropriate for the experience that you're trying to have. Now, tell us a little bit, as we're talking about who you went with, tell us about your group, the dynamics, like what's the age group of the people, the whether they're solos or couples or friends, and a little bit about the guides, and kind of tell us, like, who are you with?
It was such a great group. I got so lucky. Oddly enough, we were mostly a group of solo women travelers, which was ironic. There was only one couple, Anne and Mike, and they were just awesome. We were all about the same age. I want to say maybe the youngest gal in our group was in her early 30s. And then I was the second oldest at 61, but we also had a gal who was in her early 70s and just tough as nails. We had one gal who was from Belgium and another couple of folks that were from Colorado. There I was from Hawaii, another couple from Texas, and I'm another couple of gals from DC and I want to say Nashville. So we were from all over the U.S. and the world with the gal who was from Europe.
It's interesting you said it was mostly women. I am finding I'm going on 8 years doing this, how often it is that it's the women that are going. So guys, if you're listening, please email me and tell me how come you're doing it, because so many of the husbands and partners don't go. And I don't know why, but it's disproportionate that the women are ready to rock and roll now that we're nearing retirement age, and the men are saying, I think I'm kind of done. So if anybody has insights, please email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. Your thoughts on that?
I don't know. And also, I should mention that both of our guides were young women, which I thought was just fantastic. Very impressed with these young women. Maybe it's because, women at our age, and I had just retired as well. It's time to get out and do all of those things that we had put on pause while we were working or raising families or both. Whereas guys, I mean, I hate to speak for, the men out there. Maybe they're just ready to start sitting back and not doing things that are physically intensive. I don't know. I would have to let the guys answer that.
I would love to know because it is the strangest thing. And I get emails all the time about it. It's like, yeah, I want to go, but my husband won't go, kind of a thing. But anyway, let's get back to Alaska. So you fly into Anchorage, which I've only been to the airport there, and that was ages ago. Meet the group. Do you have a dinner, or you went right from there to head to Seward, or how did all that work?
No, we actually linked up at about 7 a.m. on the first day of the trip. And it was, after we had all independently gotten breakfast, and then we hopped in the van and headed, I want to say south to go to Seward. And it was a couple hour drive to get there, but it was beautiful. Just gorgeous scenery. We drove along a river for a good portion of the trip, and we got to see beluga whales. Our guides got very excited about that because they don't normally see them. But there was this pod of gleaming white beluga whales just kind of following us in the van as we went downriver on the route. So the trip to Seward went by very quickly. And then once we arrived, we promptly got on the ship and did our 6 hour cruise around the bay, which was just stunning. I mean, take aside the fact that we saw amazing wildlife, I could have just sat on the deck and watched the mountain scenery for hours.
Yeah, I have been to Alaska. I did the ferry cruise, not same route as the big cruise lines, but I just went with the local traffic on there. And like you said, the landscape takes your breath away. It's so pretty, and there's so many animals. So tell us about the animals that you saw, and kind of do your best to describe the landscape.
The landscape is, pictures don't do it justice. You just see mountains for as far as the eye can see. It was incredible. And I lived in Europe for a long time, and I've been in the Alps, and so I know what that looks like. But this was somehow even more amazing because it was just wilderness all the way to the horizon. We saw mostly sea life. Our ship captain was very excited because he said he hasn't seen this many orcas and dolphins and puffins in a long time. It was kind of towards the end of the season in late August. Just so many pods of orcas and dolphins and porpoise. Saw a few eagles on the shoreline. Didn't see any bears on this trip. That was going to come later, but plenty of sea lions and sea otters. Just very exciting. And then, we did a turn around the bay that has the glacier. I can't remember the name of the glacier that we saw, but that was just enchanting to see this blue ice pouring into the ocean. And he got us as close as he safely could. You don't want to get too close in case the glacier decides to calve, which ours did not. I was kind of hoping it would, but still very beautiful, amazing to see this beautiful, beautiful glacier pouring into the ocean like that.
For those that aren't familiar with the term glacial calving, can you describe it?
Well, I didn't see it, but just from watching videos, it's when a piece of the glacier breaks off and falls into the ocean. And if it's a big enough piece, it can cause a pretty gnarly wave that you don't want to be under if you don't have to. Especially when we didn't do this, but if you're in a kayak, you would not want to be too close to a glacier that's breaking off. And because this was the summer season, it's my understanding that there is a real danger of that just because it's a little warmer. But no, we did not get to see it. darn it.
I know it is. I've only seen like the waves afterwards a little bit, or just a little bit, but not the things like you said, like you can see online. I'll see if I can find a video and put it online with this show. So that sounds really, really cool. And then so the next day you have a pretty decent hike. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, so the next day was our biggest hike of the trip. And I later told our guides that I'm glad that they had us do that first because get the hard one out of the way. So we hiked up to the Harding Icefield Trail, and we were on the trail for a good 7 hours round trip, I would say. We had beautiful weather. We started out early in the morning, and it was definitely challenging. Thankfully, the guides had a lot of rest stops planned for us, and they always picked beautiful, beautiful spots to sit and have a snack and drink some water and just take in these beautiful flower filled meadows and snow capped peaks in the background. And so we just steadily made our way up all the way to the top, and we were rewarded at the end with this brilliant view of the Harding Icefield, which is the tip of a glacier coming down the mountainside. And so on the hike up, it was all beautiful forest, very pleasant weather, probably in the high 50s. But by the time we got to the top, a little after lunchtime, it was snow on the top all the way as far as the eye could see. Really, really neat to see the change in the environment from where we started at the bottom to where we finished in the top with snow everywhere. And this is August, and I'm from Hawaii, so I thought that was really cool.
And this is a good time to talk about the season. So because you're so far north, the season does run the summer months, June, July, August. And it's usually by the end of August, they're starting to wind down. And you were at the end. That's kind of interesting too.
Yes.
When I was at Glacier National Park, also up north, I thought it was very interesting. I was there in August, and flowers that I knew to be spring blooming were also blooming with flowers I knew to be fall blooming because they have such a short window. Everybody just kind of blooms at once. Did you experience that?
Oh, yes. Flowers everywhere. Anchorage, everywhere you looked were flower boxes full of spring type flowers, tulips, daffodils, all of that stuff. And same with this very rural part of Alaska. Just seeing the fields full of wildflowers took my breath away. And I deliberately chose their last hike of the season. I like to choose what I call elbow seasons because that tends to mean the crowds are less. And that was certainly the case with this hike. Not nearly as many people as there might have been a few weeks earlier. And that's just how I prefer it. It meant that the weather might be a little bit trickier, but we were very, very lucky, and it didn't rain on us until the very last day of our trip.
Very cool. And you should always be prepared anyway for the rain, the cold. I went in June, and for some reason I didn't realize how cold it would still be or could be. So I ended up buying hats and earmuffs and all that I should have packed all that. And I'll have the things that you should be packing on that in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
So this was a pretty tough hike. So it's almost 8 miles and about 3,000 foot elevation gain. So it's not a pansy hike by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I was definitely tired when we were done, and our guides were awesome. They knew that they had pushed us pretty hard, but we all made it, every single one of us, to include our gal who was in her early 70s. What a trooper. She was just quite an inspiration to all of us. But when we got to the end, our guides had a cooler and everyone was able to have a cold beer and a nice snack before we headed back to our hotel for a big dinner. So that was our reward at the end of the hike.
Very nice. Did you train ahead of time or how did you prepare for this trip?
Well, I always try to stay in good shape year round anyway, but I did know that this hike was going to be challenging. So I did hike here in Hawaii. We've got some pretty steep hills near where I live, and I try to do those hikes with a day pack, which is all that we hiked with. We didn't have to carry any kind of big packs. Our guides did that, carrying our meals and extra water. So that's how I prepared. I started a couple of months out, making sure that I could do at least 4 miles of steep hills carrying a day pack. I just didn't want to be the person holding everybody up. And it paid off. I did just fine.
Exactly. And I always find it's even better to kind of overtrain so it feels easy for you so you get more time to look out and enjoy the scenery instead of wondering, can you make it up to the next peak or the next summit or the next little ridge kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
So your next day, you do something completely different. Now you're going to go on your rafting trip. Tell us about that. And did you have to wear wetsuits or give us what happened there?
Yes, so we did a float, is what I would call it, down the Kenai River with a guide who did all of the paddling, and she was just delightful. But they made sure, again, that we were very, very safe. We wore, I can't remember if they put us in wetsuits, but I do remember these armpit high waders that they put us in. So we were protected from the water from head to toe. We all looked so silly, but it was good because that water is cold. And so they had us completely kitted up so that we would be safe and warm. And we did this couple-hour float down the Kenai River. And our guide, she was just so adorable, kept us entertained the entire way, giving us a narration of everything that we were seeing on the way down. And the best part of this was counting eagles. She made each of us pick a number of how many eagles she thought we would see on the trip, and I picked some number that was ridiculous. I think I said 17. The number ended up being like in the high 40s. There were that many eagles down this river. We also saw bears on the shoreline fishing for salmon. This is the salmon running season. So lots and lots of fish in the water that we got to see, not to mention fishermen on the shoreline fishing for salmon. There was one bear in particular. He was lazy. He would sit and eat the scraps that the fishermen had left. And there was this bear just sitting there eating fish scraps on the shoreline with an eagle on the shore right next to him, nibbling on the scraps. I'll always have that memory of just being pretty humorous to see the bear and the eagle coexisting so nicely on the shoreline.
Very cool. Now, how wide is this river? So how close could you get to the bears?
I would say maybe 100 feet. The river was probably 50 yards wide, 50 to 100 yards wide. It not that wide. You know what? I take that back. I don't think it was as much as 100 yards wide, maybe 50 yards. So we had a very good view of wildlife on the shore.
Very nice. Did anybody have binoculars?
I want to say someone did, and that was really good for eagle spotting.
Now that sounds very exciting. Were you lucky enough to see any moose?
We did not see a moose on this trip. We did see a moose when we did the bus tour of Denali National Park.
Okay. Very nice. So then the next day, you're now heading north again, and you're going to go, I'm going to really butcher that. Ekalukato. How do you say that lake?
I have no idea. But I just remember it was in the Talkeetna area, and that I'm able to pronounce.
Okay, yeah. So that, which is the gateway to Denali. So tell us a little bit about that day.
Well, that whole area is just so ridiculously beautiful. And again, we had such great weather. So that day, this is where our group split up. Most of the group chose to do the optional airplane tour where they take you up and they take you around Denali and they actually land on the side of the mountain and you get to walk around. And I'm sure that was absolutely thrilling, but that's not really my thing. I prefer to hike. So the bulk of the group did that while me and one guide and one other gal who tends to be a little airsick chose to do the hike around the lake. So while the other guys were flying, we did this beautiful hike around a couple of lakes where we didn't see a lot of wildlife, which was actually fine with me. I don't really want to have a close encounter with a bear in the middle of the woods. But we did see a lot of beautiful, beautiful scenery, just lots of colors. Fall colors are just starting to turn in that part of Alaska. And at the end of our gorgeous hike, the guide and I decided to get wild and crazy, and we uh, put on our swimsuits and jumped into an ice cold pond while the other gal took a video of us acting like fools jumping in the water. We were only able to stay in for a couple of minutes because it was pretty cold, but what a great way to end our hike.
Very much so. That is cool. And now the town itself, because you're on your own that evening to explore this town, just looking at the photos I saw online, it looks like a cool little village.
It really is. Oh, yes. Very walkable. So many cute shops and restaurants. I did my share of souvenir shopping when I walked around the town. And there's a part of the town at the very end where it ends at the lake, where we had a gorgeous view of Denali in the distance. And I was able to get some good photos of the mountain across the lake and on the horizon. So it really is the gateway to Denali.
And it looked too like it was a little artsy vibe to it. They had a craft brewery, they had some arts, and then also they made a mention about because you're kind of away from everything. So the locals just over by tradition have learned to live off of the things they can find from the land. When I was in Alaska, I saw these two people poking in a forest, and I could tell they were doing something with the what it looked like a pine tree to me. And so being nosy, I said, well, "What are y'all doing?" And they were pulling the little tips off the spruces, and they would make a syrup out of it, which I ended up buying some. It's actually quite nice. So did you notice that they had some unusual kinds of foods that you're not used to seeing?
You know, nothing sticks out in my mind. I was more focused on buying scarves and mittens and uh, Christmas tree ornaments and items like that. I do think they had a lot of jams made from the local berries. And I believe there might have been some honeys as well, variety of honeys.
I'm sure. And there's a roadhouse there that boasts that they are making pancakes with the same sourdough starter they've been using since 1902. So that's kind of interesting, I thought.
Absolutely. Wow. I wish I had tried that.
Yeah, so it looks like a real fun town to explore and just hang out and just kind of see what Alaskan life is like. Even that the architecture looked interesting to me too, according to the photos.
Yes, absolutely. And great coffee shops too, I should mention. Excellent coffee.
So now you are in Denali and you go on it's almost like a backcountry photo safari. Tell us about that day.
This was actually one of my absolute favorite days, which I didn't think it would be because it didn't involve a lot of hiking, but we just got to see so much of Denali National Park. So we started our day by going to the visitor center, and our guides were great. They made us get in line first so that we could have the best seats at the front of the bus when we loaded the bus with, I want to say maybe there were 30 of us total, our group plus, a number of other tour groups. But we get on this large bus. We had a great narrator who was an old timer who had lived in Alaska forever, but he wasn't from Alaska. He was from, I want to say, Illinois, and he would come up every summer to work in Denali Park and take people on these tours. So he definitely knew what he was doing. But we spent about 4 or 5 hours driving all around Denali National Park. And what made it special is they very much control access to the park. So you're not out there jockeying for position with a bunch of private automobiles. It's just the buses. And they schedule the buses so that you're kind of out there on your own and you're not dealing with a lot of people. But I cannot say enough wonderful things about the beauty of Denali National Park. It was very open country, not a lot of forest, but the hillsides were just again covered with these wildflowers, wildlife everywhere. We saw elk, we saw Dall sheep high up on the mountainside. We saw a multitude of bears out eating their berries, fattening themselves up for the winter. And this is also where we got to see the moose. Now, moose are very, very shy creatures, and I didn't realize how hard it would be to actually see a moose. But we were driving along, and all of a sudden, our bus driver yelled, "Moose." And I looked up just in time to see literally a moose butt bounding through the woods as it crossed the road in the front of the bus. So that's all we saw was the butt of a moose disappearing into the forest. But at least I can say I saw a moose.
Better than no moose butt.
Yes, saw a moose butt.
There you go. It's probably unlikely that you saw wolves, but there are wolves up there.
Yes, that's what probably the only wildlife we did not see. I did get to see wolves in my trip to Yellowstone that I completed back in February, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But no wolves in Alaska this time.
Overall, a scale of 10, what was this day for you?
Oh, this was definitely an 11.
Wonderful.
It was just spectacular. I had got so many beautiful photos. I learned so much about the park. We did get good views of Denali itself. So we're just kind of driving around the foothills of Denali at this point. We're not actually, at the base of the mountain, but we did get some beautiful photos of Denali itself, and just fantastic. I loved it.
Nice. Now, the next day, you're actually hiking in Denali National Park. So how do they protect you from bears? Do you carry bear spray? Or tell us about hiking in Denali.
So, yes, this is where we did the Triple Lakes hike. And this was a pretty epic hike, too, in that we were out there pretty much all day. Our guides have bear spray, and they always tell us to make a lot of noise so that we don't ever risk sneaking up on a bear and startling it. But we did not see a bear. Again, this was mostly seeing birds and some ground squirrels and some butterflies, but it was mostly about the beautiful scenery. Got to see a train go by, which was kind of exciting because it runs right in front of you. So I don't often get that close to a moving train. So that was a bit of a thrill there. But it was mostly about the beautiful scenery, walking through the woods, walking around the lakes, a lot of mushrooms. Really learned a lot about wild mushrooms on this hike and took a lot of photos. Later learned from one of my Facebook friends that pretty much every mushroom we saw was very poisonous. So I'm glad I didn't touch them. I just took their photos. But again, this is another hike where we finished up, and me and the guides, and actually at this point we were able to get 2 members of our groups to put on our swimsuits and go running off the dock and go jumping into a cold lake. We were really getting into this. Apparently we were the first group to ever actually do this with our guides. So I can't recommend it enough. If you have the opportunity to do a cold plunge in a pond in Alaska, you should do it.
You are a brave woman there, Miss Millie. I dunked once in New Zealand. When you were with Active in New Zealand, you were in the South Island or North Island?
I was in the South Island.
So did you stay at the sheep herder shed?
Probably.
Okay, there was a lake there that I did dunk in that. I bet you it took me 30 minutes because I didn't just plunge. I walked, and you just can't get used to it. It's too cold, these glacial lakes.
Yep, you go in and you get out.
You need to do what you have to do. I call that my one and only polar plunge, but maybe I'll try it doing your way one day. Just jump in and then jump out.
Yep, and then you hop in the warm van.
There you go. And the vans are very comfortable too, I think, that they do a good job on the transport with this company.
And the other thing I should mention that we did on this particular hike that's actually not part of the regular itinerary is we had the opportunity to do some kayaking and see salmon spawning. So this was a real quick little 1-hour kayak that we just were able to jump on the opportunity. And this was really special as well because, again, our guide was very excited about taking us to see the salmon spawning. So we kayaked across this little lake into a creek, and everywhere you looked were salmon turning red, which is what they at the end of their spawn. And sadly, after they finish turning red, they go off to die. But it was just so special to see this part of the salmon cycle of where they go from silver to turning this deep, deep red color. So if you can just imagine a creek just filled with red salmon everywhere you looked. It was quite magical and very special. And apparently that's not something that you always see. It's not a guarantee.
That is so cool.
It was.
That is so cool. All right, so let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty things. Speaking of salmon, let's talk about food. How was the food on the trip?
The food was excellent. They know how to eat in Alaska. We started every morning with a hearty breakfast at whatever hotel or lodge we were staying at. And remind me to tell you a funny story about the lodge that we stayed in Denali. But no complaints. The guides carried our lunches whenever we were out on a trail, and they were usually like a wrap type sandwich with plenty of fresh fruit, very healthy. Dinners were excellent. We didn't go to a single bad restaurant, and always good hearty food where you could eat Alaskan style. Like, there might be an elk item on the menu, always salmon. I think I ate salmon every single day. It was excellent. Good beer. They make good beer in Alaska.
Well, and you get to pick off the menu whatever you want.
Yes, anything that you want. There was nothing that was set. We were able to, it's all included in the price.
Very nice. And so let's move from there to the lodging. Tell us about the lodging and your funny story.
Yes. So, I want to emphasize that you're in Alaska, you're in the backcountry. This is not time to expect 5-star lodging. But what you do have are very rustic type lodging with beautiful views and great restaurants. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. But my favorite lodging story is when we were staying in little cabins outside of Denali National Park. Everybody had their own cabin, and it was just fantastic. But one night, I was awoken in the middle of the night by this sound of scratching, just it was very loud. And I sit up in bed, and of course, my first thought is, a bear is trying to get into my cabin. And then I realized, I think a bear would be louder than this. So I turned on my light and just in time got to see this mouse tail disappearing into my pack, which I had left open on the floor. And I thought, aha. So I get up, I go over, pick up my pack. I open the door, again, worrying about a bear being out there, but there wasn't. And I open my pack, and sure enough, there's this very large rodent in my pack. And he wouldn't leave, so I had to actually reach in there and give him a little pat on the butt to get him to exit my pack, which he did and disappeared. So I go back. This time I zip up my pack and I go back to sleep. No big deal. The next day, I'm getting dressed for dinner, and I'm putting my foot into my shoe when I feel something hard in there. And I'm like, what is this? So I dump out my shoe, and into my hand falls a chocolate kiss, a Hershey's chocolate kiss. It was unwrapped and it was partially nibbled on. This was in my shoe. And I'm scratching my head because I didn't have any chocolate kisses in my pack. I've got to assume that my mouse friend took this chocolate kiss from somewhere, unwrapped it, had dessert, and then stashed it in my shoe. And so, of course, I had to take a photo of the chocolate eating, well, what he had left for me, that partially eaten chocolate kiss. And so I took it to dinner and showed everybody and told them this story of my mouse friend. And yeah, that guy, he was just making himself at home.
I'm glad it was a kiss and not the mouse when you put your foot in there. That's a funny story.
No kidding, especially since I did not have any chocolates in my room.
Exactly. Well, so your advice on that would be to keep the pack closed up, but then if you have food in there, My advice is don't store any food in your pack. At night, keep that separate because they could chew right through your pack.
Yes, they can.
That's what they do on the AT all the time. Yeah, the Appalachian Trail, they do it all the time.
Yep, yep, yep. And he was going after my protein bars that I had stored in my pack.
All right, so that'll be our little tip there is to, at night, keep the food separate and then join them back up in the morning, just in case you have a visitor.
Absolutely.
So that's one piece of advice. What are some other things that you either wish you'd known or advice you'd like to give people that are thinking about this trip?
Well, you had kind of touched upon it earlier, and that's don't underestimate the weather in Alaska. It definitely gets cold at night, and I don't tolerate cold very well. So I was glad that I had packed plenty of fleece pullovers and a wool hat and fleece gloves. It also can rain epically. I'm glad I brought waterproof pants and a Gore-Tex jacket because it did rain on us quite a bit on our very last day of the trip. So, good wet weather gear is a must. It's very casual, so no need to pack anything fancy. Although I did pack a couple of pretty blouses just to wear at dinner rather than wearing my hiking clothes at dinner. That's just me. That's how I like to do it. Other people just wore their hiking stuff to dinner, which was fine too. Definitely bring your medications and contact lenses and anything that you need that's personal and healthcare related. But don't pack too much. There's just no, you don't want to be lugging too much stuff around. So I definitely wore things more than once. If I needed to wash out stuff in the sink of my room and hang it to dry, I would do that.
Definitely. Nice. So on your last evening with the group, I assume you had some kind of like a celebratory dinner, or did they do anything special, or tell us about that?
We did. We had a lovely dinner in the restaurant of the lodge that we stayed that was just very, very special. It was a nice restaurant and it was delicious. And we had a great time swapping stories. Of course, the chocolate eating mouse was a highlight of that particular dinner. Good wine, good beer, and just a great way to cement these lasting friendships that I developed. I still keep in touch with members of this group. We really did become that close.
I think that's something. Well, I often say that people that go on these kinds of trips are kind of self-selected to be similar mindsets in how they like to do things. And it's not unusual for you to find a lifelong friend on these trips.
Absolutely. And like I said, we still keep in touch. I wouldn't be surprised if some of us ended up on another Austin adventure trip in the future.
Then the next day you get one last shot in Denali before you head back to Anchorage. You get one more hike in, is that right?
Yes, and that's the one where it finally rained. And it rained on us the whole way, but that didn't stop us from getting out there and just enjoying a different type of weather. It definitely made it a little more interesting, a little more challenging. We were all glad that we had good wet weather gear, but it didn't stop us, and we had a blast.
On the rain too, just a little tip that I've learned from hiking is in addition to your rain jacket, which presumably has a hood on it, I like to wear a ball cap, which will extend the rain drip line a little bit like a roof line so that it's not dripping down your face. It keeps it a couple inches off your face. That's just a little tip that's made my life a little bit more pleasant and doesn't weigh a whole lot.
Absolutely. I did something similar. I was wearing a brimmed hat that also kept the rain from falling directly onto my face.
Definitely. So you've traveled, it sounds like, all over the place, have done some amazing adventures. How does this trip compare to some of the others that you did? Like, where would you put this as like one of the best or a good one, definitely put on the list? Or how would you describe this to somebody that's saying, where do I go next? Should I do this one?
It's funny. I was actually thinking, where would I rank this trip? And it definitely goes in, one of the top three of trips that I've ever taken. And so we're talking, it ranks up there with the Galapagos and my trip to the South Island of New Zealand, as well as Machu Picchu, which those trips stick out in my mind as being some of the most amazing trips I've ever done. And I have to give credit to our guides for making it logistically easy for us as the guests. They got to do all of the heavy lifting, both literally and figuratively, of having the trip just flow in a very nice sequence. We didn't have any problems. And of course, it's Alaska, and the scenery itself is enough to stick it at the top of my list.
Very cool. So it sounds like an amazing trip, and definitely one now that I've got to go on. Like I said, I've been to Alaska on the water side, but I didn't make it up as far as Denali, and I've always wanted to do that. Now I definitely want to go. So I assume you've got other plans. Where to next for Millie?
Well, ironically, I just got back from 2 weeks in Vietnam and Cambodia, where I did a similar type of trip where it was a combination of hiking and a cruise through Ha Long Bay, as well as kayaking. So you can tell I love that kind of mixed activity type of trip. But I'm thinking next summer it's going to be hiking in Japan, doing a multi-day hike along a pilgrimage trail. I haven't quite decided yet which one.
Are you doing the Kamano Kodo?
Possibly. That's on the list of one that I'm going to consider.
Very cool. Yeah, that's on my radar too, although I'm thinking about maybe the winter 2025, 26, probably like late next year would be my guess.
For Japan?
For Japan, yeah. So I'm going to be going to Bhutan in October. And now it looks like I'm going to be doing Everest Base Camp right before that. And I was like, well, shoot, I think I'll just get a house sitter and just go to Asia for a while. And I've wanted to do that Kamano Kodo since I interviewed Sherry from Ott's World, I don't know, years ago. It's been on the radar. I was like, I got to do it while my body still can do it.
Absolutely. In fact, two couples from the group that I did Vietnam and Cambodia with subsequently flew to Japan and did that trail. And the photos that they sent back were just spectacular. They had beautiful weather. The cherry blossoms were blooming. It just looked fantastic.
And they say the fall's beautiful too, and it's only because of all the fall color.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, there's just so many places to go and not enough time. And then we don't know how long our body is going to cooperate with us.
Yeah, that's so true. Do it now.
So I'm trying to do all the hard things now and get them done because I don't want to be sitting in my rocking chair whenever and saying, oh, I wish I'd done that. I want to do it now.
Yes. So I still got Patagonia to do.
I did that 2 years ago. You're going to love that. And go with Active. It's an amazing trip.
That was my plan. It was all bought and paid for. And I was scheduled to fly out on, get this, the 18th of March, 2020.
Oh, dear. All right.
They had to call me and say, we're sorry. I had my bags packed, everything.
Oh, wow.
And then the pandemic shut it down. So that actually Alaska and Yellowstone were my filler trips where I used the funds from my Patagonia trip to cover those two trips.
Too cool. Very cool. So in fact, all the places we've talked about today, I have covered on the show. So I'll put links to all those in the show notes in case you are interested in checking out any of the things that Millie and I have talked about today. Well, Millie, this has been an excellent overview of your trip to Alaska. Thank you so much for coming on the program. I know that you've inspired a lot of us to get up to Alaska.
Great. That would be my greatest wish. Thank you for having me.
And when you get back from Patagonia, you'll have to come back on and tell us how you experienced it. Because I find that even though it might be the same trip, everybody has a different experience and they have different stories to tell.
Absolutely. I will do that.
And nobody's got a Hershey's Kiss in their shoe, chewed on, delivered as a gift from a mouse.
Exactly. That was so wild.
Thanks again, Millie. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kit. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Millie today. I know she sure got me excited and added yet another trip to my adventures. I had wanted to go back to Alaska anyway because I didn't make it to Denali when my husband Bill and I went. Plus, I wasn't even a hiker back when we went. I think it was like 2008. And I remember we did stop at one national park and I took a little hike and there was some man carving a totem pole as a display. And so I was over chatting with him. He said, were you hiking? I said, yeah. Beautiful country. Just loved it. He said, we have grizzlies here. I was like, well, and again, I knew nothing about the outdoors. This was well before I even discovered hiking. And I was like, oh, did not really think about that. And he said, yeah, not a good idea to be going out there by yourself. So I've learned quite a bit in the last, I guess it's going on 15 or more years since that trip. And I've always missed that I didn't get to see Denali. I've had friends that have gone there. I've seen photos. It's something super exciting for me to do. If that's something you want to go with me on, let me know. I'll start a list on that, and maybe we can put together a group for that as well. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to sign up for the once a month newsletter where you will get access to all the travel planners for this adventure, as well as every adventure and checklist and packing list that I put together in the last almost 8 years since I've been doing this show. You can do so by going to the website at activetravelaadventures.com, click on the newsletter button. You can email me and just tell me, Kit, put me on the list at kit@activetravelaadventures.com. In fact, write me anytime about anything. If there's any way I can help you, happy to. I love getting your emails. And again, it's only once a month. I don't spam you. I don't sell your name. It's just our way to have a two-way conversation. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.